Hello, this is the third instalment in The Children of Green Knowe by Lucy M. Boston. Toseland walked in front with the lantern, and they stepped from the stables into shallow water and waded slowly towards the house. As they went under the big yew trees, the lantern lit up the underneath of the branches, making them look like rafters in wild magic houses. The windows of Green Knowe were all lit up again. Tolly felt as if he had lived here always, instead of just one day. Mrs. Old Knowe was sitting in front of a tea tray by the fire, just as before when Tolly came in all dirty with bits of straw in his hair. "I can see where you've been," she said. "Go and wash yourself and get the straw out of your hair. Then come and tell me all about it. I can see you are bursting with questions again." When he came back, she said, "Show me your hands. And now turn round and let me see if you've got peat dust on the seat of your trousers. There. Now, begin. Here's some hot buttered toast and honey." "Granny, what was the name of Toby's special horse?" Mrs. Old Knowe put down her cup and saucer. "Boggis has been telling you stories." "Yes, I found something." "Toby's horse was called Fester. What did you find?" "I found a funny board with patterns and writing on it. It looked like a name, but I couldn't read it. It was funny writing." "It was a name? Fest. Good boy. You are doing well. I thought that board was lost, that someone had chopped it up by mistake or on purpose. I haven't seen it since I was married. When the stables were built, each horse had its name above the manger. Alexander had a white pony called Bucephalus. A poor little Lynette wasn't allowed to a horse of her own. She rode in a pannier behind her mother, or Boggis. I mean the Boggis there was then." "Granny, I do want to hear Fest neigh. Is my bedroom too far away to hear him? If he did, I mean." She smiled gently at him. "No, I don't think it's too far away." "Did you hear him when you were little?" "Oh, oh yes, I heard him. Generally at sundown. There were other horses then, of course, but I could always tell Fest's voice. It is quite individual." There was a long silence while Toseland imagined having a horse of his own, even a ghost horse. "I did a silly thing," he said at last. "I put a lump of sugar for him." "That wasn't silly at all, darling," she said. "Granny, what did Lynette put in the cage?" "The chaffinch didn't like sugar. He came, you know, but he wouldn't stay." "Lynette always left the door open, but she didn't like to shut them in. She put crumbs of pastry and biscuit and seeds that she gathered in the garden in the summer. The chaffinches came and went as they liked, but they always built their nest in the cage in the spring. She put a forked branch of hawthorn for them. You can do that too. I am surprised they have remembered for so long. No one has used that room for years. I think they must tell stories to their nestlings." "Stories about Lynette, as you do to me." "Why not?" "Tell me more about them, please. Why isn't their father there in the picture?" "He was a ship's captain. There was an older boy too, Aubrey, who was a midshipman on his father's ship. Captain Old Knowe sailed all over the world. He used to bring home presents for the family. From one journey he brought the mouse for Toby, your mouse, and that great silk Chinese lantern that hangs in the music room for his wife. It opens and shuts like an umbrella. But I never touch it now because the silk is so old and tender. Alexander and Lynette were not born then. What else did he bring home? From Holland he brought all that lovely lace that they are wearing, and the birdcage from Spain, Toby's sword. Oh, and from Germany the book that Alexander's holding. How could he read it if it was a German book? It was in Latin, and he could read it, and he loved it. From France he brought that little dog for Lynette, and a lot of rose trees for his wife. Those are the flowers in her basket. Roses were almost a new discovery, very fashionable and exciting. Everybody wanted to have some. They are growing here in the garden still. The same ones. The same, in a way, descended from them as you are from the captain. I feel as though I had lived here always, said Toseland. Why is it called Green Knowe? Mrs. Old Know's face suddenly creased into rings of unhappy wrinkles. For someone who's lived here always, you ask a lot of questions, she said. I know, Granny, but tell me, please. It's not the real name, she said. It used to be called Green Knowe, but it got changed a long time ago. That was all she would say, but Tolly had more questions. You know, he said, all those children's faces carved in wood in the entrance hall. They all seemed to be laughing when I came in. Who put them there? This time Mrs. Old Knowe looked pleased. The grandmother in the picture found them in a builder's store. They came from the chapel of a monastery that had been pulled down. She bought them for the beams in the children's bedroom. She said they were guardian angels. Now, as you see, they are welcoming angels. Though one was guardian to a chaffinch last year. What colour was Fest? He was a chestnut, with a white nose and 4 white feet like a kitten, and he jumped like a cat. Toby and he loved each other more than anything on earth. But the deer was Toby's too, said Tolly, gazing at the picture. Isn't it beautiful? A deer seems more magic than a horse. Very beautiful fairy tale magic. But a horse that thinks the same thoughts that you do is like strong magic wine, a love philter for boys. Tolly lay awake in bed. There was so much to think about. The birds, the children, the floods, the stables, where lovely Fest called for his master. It was a clear night, with the full moon shining on miles of water and seeming twice as bright as usual. The bedroom was all silver and black with it as it poured through the window and flooded the floor with quicksilver. The flame of the nightlight looked like a little golden pen nib, giving less light than there was already around it. The moon shone in the rocking horse's eye, and in the mouse's eye too, when Tolly fetched it out from under his pillow to see. The clock went tick-tock, and in the stillness he thought he heard little bare feet running across the floor, then laughter. and whispering, and a sound like the pages of a big book being turned over. It might be Alexander and Lynette looking at pictures by moonlight, he thought dreamily. But where are they? He sat up and stared all around the room. There was only his own bed, and all his things just as he had left them, clearly seen in the moonlight, though there were black patches of shadow under the window where he could not see. Then there was all the room repeated in the looking glass, more mysterious. The moonlit parts brighter, the dark more impenetrable. The whispering went on. If they were in the dark corners, he thought, they couldn't see the pictures. Lynette, he called suddenly, where are you? Come out into the moonlight. There was a laugh, just where he wasn't looking. When he turned that way, a patter of feet, and the whispering was where he had been looking a moment before. Are you just teasing me? He asked, and was answered by such an infectious little laugh that he couldn't help laughing too. After that there was silence, but it was a companionable, happy one, in which presently he smiled and settled himself to sleep. He dreamed that he was holding out his hands dripping with golden syrup, and that it was Fest who came with his soft white nose and pinky grey lips and sucked it all off, while Lynette flew in the air like a bird and laughed from the branches of the trees. When he woke, Mrs. Old Knowe was standing by his bed, smiling at him. It's time to get up. Look, the floods have all gone in the night. Come and see. She opened the window to lean out. Tolly, quick, quick! Under the high window all the lawns were emerald green. Beyond them the river flowed obediently in its own course, and beyond that again were miles of green meadow. Right in front of the window, where the last pool was draining away from a hollow in the grass, a large silvery thing was twisting and jumping violently in the sun. It's a great big fish. It's one of Toby's carp from the moat. Silly thing, it has got left behind when the water went away. Run, Tolly, put on your coat and your Wellingtons and throw it back into the moat. Tolly ran as fast as he could, slithering down the steep winding stairs in his socks and pulling on his Wellingtons by the front door. He reached the fish before anyone else, but it was nearly as big as himself and flapped so wildly when he picked it up that he was afraid and let it fall again. Then it gasped horribly and lay still. And now he was afraid to touch it in case it was dying. Just then Boggis arrived with a wheelbarrow. Quick, quick, Mr. Boggis, it's Toby's fish, it's dying, it's Toby's, Mr. Boggis, quick! Boggis came without any hurry and bent his bright red face down to look. Aye, it's Master Toby's, sure enough. What a size it have grown to. Must be hundreds of years old. He put the fish in his barrow and led Tolly to the moat, which was a ring of deep water all round the garden. There he tipped the barrow up and the fish plopped in and disappeared. They stood and looked at the place where it had fallen. Was it still alive? Asked Tolly. As he spoke, a fish face was poked above the surface. Then there was a swirl of water, a flip of a tail, and it was gone. Sure enough it was, said Boggis. It was a very ugly fish, said Toseland. Tain't no beaut, eh? No more will you be when you're 100 years old. Master Toby used to feed it with bread. It came when he called it. It came when he called it, added Mrs. Old Knowe, joining them. Its name is Neptune. Toby used to tell Lynette that it understood Latin. He always talked to it in Latin. She was very much impressed. What did he say to it?
He said, Veni Neptune, panem dabo tibi et vermis.
I don't know any Latin.
Neither did Lynette. It means, Come, Neptune, I will give you bread and worms. In the garden you will find a platform over a pool where he fed them.
They fed the birds together. Tolly wanted his hands to be buttered again, but was told that that was only for the introduction ceremony, not for every day. Do the birds understand Latin?
No, not Latin. Music. Alexander used to play the flute to them. They used to sing when he played, but all different tunes. Only the thrushes learnt his tune, and the starlings who never sang it properly. They only made fun of it.
What tune did the thrushes sing?
Green sleeves, for one.
Oh, Granny, I know Green Sleeves. I do really. At school we had it on the wireless. I wish I had a flute.
Perhaps you'll get one for Christmas. That's quite soon, you know. Now, finish your breakfast and then you can explore the garden.
The garden had looked very desolate when the water was over it, but now even the trees looked different and every path seemed to lead just where it was most exciting to go. First he went round the east corner of the house that he had not yet seen. Broken stones stuck out all up the wall, as if there had once been a building there that had been pulled down. In fact, there was still a high garden wall with arched slits in it that must once have been windows. Ferns and shrubs and ivy were growing out of the cracks between the stones, and there was a lovely smell in the air. Quite suddenly he became aware of something so big that at first he had not seen it. Against the side of the house, immensely tall and half covered with festoons of old man's beard, was a stone figure. The first thing that attracted his attention to it was close to the ground, some stone fishes swimming in what looked like stone water, as though the flood had left something behind. Then he saw that the fishes were two huge bare stone feet that seemed to be paddling with stone ripples around the ankles. Above them legs and folds of clothing. High above that, so that he had to step back to look up at it, among the twining strings of the creeper, he saw the head of a giant stone man carrying a child on his shoulders. Tolly was astonished. He looked and looked at it and could not go away. He played around its feet for a long time, collecting coloured pebbles out of the gravel and stones that were like different things, such as a peg top, an egg, a calf's face, a hammerhead, and a real marble. Every now and then he would look up to see the statue again. Its surface was worn soft by rain and frost and wind, not shiny and hard like monuments in churches. It looked friendly, nearly alive. Tolly loved it. At last curiosity led him away to see where the other paths would lead. There were many big trees and wild places where there were only little paths like rabbit runs. As he went along, the birds went with him. They whistled and chirped on every side, and always flew out of the bushes just before he arrived there to perch on others just ahead. He followed a track round the edge of the moat, shuffling his feet in the dead leaves and pine needles and stooping under low branches. Here, in a little clearing between two huge trees, he found his next great surprise. Standing on the grass with its ears pricked up as if it had just heard him was a deer. That was a bush. It was like Toby's deer in the picture, but cut out of live evergreen with brown bush-stalk legs growing out of the ground. Toseland stroked it. Its neck felt soft. It seemed so much alive that it was queer that of course it couldn't have eyes. How wild it looks without eyes, he thought. How magic. It took his breath away. And then he saw sitting under a big beech tree a green ewe squirrel with a high tail that seemed to be listening too. Other living things besides the birds were rustling in the bushes, and he heard other calls more like children than birds. Tolly ran, hoping to catch them. He found nothing but a live rabbit that bolted in long hops and shot down a hole. He ran on down the little path past a ewe peacock that was comparatively ordinary. Further on there was a green hare sitting very erect by the water's edge. Then the path suddenly turned and left the water, going by a bank of trees and dense undergrowth and brambles, where it would be almost impossible to walk. It came out between a ewe cock and hen on to a large lawn. Tolly wanted to get back to the water again, and by he found a flight of steps which led down towards it. Here the moat formed a deep pool overshadowed by trees, though now it was water and the branches were bare except for the birds that had followed him, and he perched there. The water was brown, with a blue gloss reflected on it from the sky, like a starling's back. The steps ended in a wooden platform. As Tolly stood and looked into the water, he thought he saw deep down a great shadowy fish swimming slowly. This, then, was Toby's platform. Tolly tried to remember the Latin, but he knew it was hopeless. He would only make silly noises and the fish would know it was wrong. Just then something fell in the water. He couldn't see what it was because it sank and wobbled as it went down, but the old carp rose slowly to meet it and opened its mouth to suck it in. Then he sank again out of sight. What can that have been? Thought Toseland. Perhaps a greedy blackbird took more breakfast than it could eat and threw its last crust away. And yet I don't believe that. It couldn't have tut-tutted and called so much if its mouth was full. He began to retrace his steps, and now, in the wood path, he was sure there were others besides himself. Of course, he thought suddenly, it's hide and seek. Cooey, he called. The green deer is den. He ran as fast as he could till he stopped out of breath with his arms around the green deer's neck. Then he heard unmistakable breathless laughter quite close to him, and he felt something on his head. He put his hand up and found a twig. It was not something that could have fallen off any of the trees round him. It was cut out of a reddish bush and made a perfect T. When he got back to the house, he turned for another look at the stone man. Mrs. Oldknow was there with some garden scissors, cutting branches off the shrubs, which he now noticed with a little disappointment were covered with the peculiar flowers he had first seen in the entrance hall. When I first came, he said, I thought those were magic flowers in the hall. So you were afraid I was a witch? Yes, before I saw you. Well, this flower is called witch hazel, and this is wintersweet, and that is Daphne. She was turned into a bush, you know. Mrs. Oldknow, who saw everything, was looking at the twig tea in his hand. You found the green deer, and somebody's been teasing you, I see. When I was little, I used to find a twig L in my lap. You see, my Christian name is Lynette. Did they play hide and seek with you? Yes. Toseland was looking at the stone man. Who is he? He is our own Saint Christopher, and these ruins are where his chapel stood until some stupid wretch pulled it down. There is always a St. Christopher by an old ford, and the ford across this river was at the end of the garden. You know the story? He carried the infant Jesus across in a storm, thinking it would be easy, but halfway across he began to feel the child as heavy as the sorrow of the whole world. Lynette loved St. Christopher quite specially. She always liked to play here. I planted what you thought were magic flowers for winter incense.
This is my favourite part of the garden too. Now, tell me where you've been this morning."
"I've seen the green deer and all the other things."
"All? Which have you seen?"
"The deer and the squirrel and the peacock and the hare and the cock and the hen."
Mrs. Oldknow seemed relieved. "And what else?"
"And I found Toby's steps by the water, and I saw the fish again, and they played hide and seek."
Tolly was glad that Mrs. Oldknow seemed not at all surprised by the hide and seek. He was not quite sure whether she thought that he and she were playing a game together, pretending that there were other children, or whether she thought, as he did, that the children were really there. In the afternoon he went back to the stables to look in Fest's manger. The sugar had gone. Toseland put another lump in its place and slipped away again so that it might be eaten quite quickly in private. Boggis had gone out on a message for Mrs. Oldknow, and she herself was writing letters, so Tolly was alone again. But he had almost forgotten that it was sometimes dull. He went back to the green deer full of expectation, but all the birds seemed asleep, and there was not a sound anywhere. The green deer did not seem magic now. It was not listening, its eyelessness was just stupid, not an added sense. The squirrel also was only a bush cut to shape. Tolly had come with an excited imagination. He collected beech nuts and put them before the squirrel, and handfuls of dry hay for the deer, but it turned out only a dull make-believe. Nothing moved, nothing happened. All his interest faded away. He could think of nothing to do alone, and as the afternoon wore on, he felt lonely and neglected. He went back to the stables, but there were only empty buildings. There was no echo, there was nothing, there was nobody. When it began to get dark, he went indoors. Mrs. Oldknow was getting the tea ready. "Can I come in now?" he asked. She looked at him quickly and saw at once what was the matter. "Yes, come in, darling. You've been alone quite long enough, and so have I. It's been one of those afternoons when nothing will come alive. I know them. Sit down there opposite your friends, and after tea we'll see what we can do together. Did you see your chaffinch today?" "Oh," said Toseland, very much ashamed. "I forgot to put anything for him. Suppose he's been tapping and tapping at the window and nobody came. Will he come again, do you think?" "Try shortbread crumbs and see if that pleases him tomorrow morning. He might have spent all afternoon with you if you hadn't forgotten him." Tolly felt in a better temper already. "Who made all the green animals?" he asked. "Boggis's grandfather. They were there when I was a child, and when I asked him about them, he said the children wanted them for the ark. There weren't any children living here then. My cousins were all much older than me, but at the time I thought I knew what he meant. He was very like our Boggis, but his face was redder and his eyes were bluer, and he dearly loved the bottle."
"Did they ever tame squirrel?"
"They tamed everything. They seemed to understand animals. The hare used to come into the house, lolloping up and down stairs after Toby, or standing up to look out of the windows to see where he had gone. It was called What?" When they had finished with their tea, Mrs. Oldknow said, "Make up a great blaze, Tolly, and then let's put the lights out and sit here, and I will tell you a story." Tolly made a crackling fire using the big leather bellows. There was a tear in one side, so that when they sucked in, the fire grew crimson and tried to follow the draught up the nozzle. When they blew out, the flames turned primrose and blue, and sparks flew up as if from a Catherine wheel. Then he blew out all the candles and came and settled himself at her feet. What shall it be about?"
"Tell me a story about Fest, please."